Production support for Hot and Cold is brought to you by American Solar Technics, manufacturers of components for wood burning and solar heating systems. Hey, I'm Tom Gosey. This week on Hot and Cold, we've got to get heat. And the reason we have to get heat is because I've got the wood stove running here, and you know what? That wood stove isn't 24-hour-a-day heat. I only run it while it's here because I don't even want to think what the fire inspector would say about it. So we only run it while we're here. And we're ready to hook up the oil heat. And look what we've got. We've got some Roth oil tanks. Man, this is going to be a fun show. So you ask yourself, why, Tom, did you take out a perfectly good steel tank that was over here and put these tanks in? Well, for a couple of reasons. One, we had to move the tank anyway because we sprayed the foam on the basement walls. And I wanted to get more storage capacity on site. And a couple of reasons for that. This house, by my calculations, should run under 200 gallons of oil a year for space heat. We have here two 275-gallon tanks, which will mean we would probably be able to carry this house through an entire year filling once a year. Probably go longer than that. And I love the Roth oil tanks, and I love them for a couple of reasons. One, the footprint is a lot less because a regular oil tank, the bottom of the tank would be here and it would have legs. The Roth tank goes right down to here, sits on a steel cradle, and supports the tank. So we go from right down here, 3 inches off the floor, right up to here with oil. We have a full tank. So it makes the footprint a lot smaller. So we really get 550 gallons of storage in a space that is roughly the same square footprint that a 275-gallon tank would do. So that's wonderful. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is these tanks are plastic tanks. And I can show you here if I take one of these big things off. This is the actual tank. The tank is a polyethylene tank. They're made in Germany. And my understanding is in Germany they use the bare tank for oil storage and have for years and years. And they stand up very well. In our country we have them as a dual containment system where we have a plastic, the plastic tank, but around the outside we have a galvanized liquid tight tank as well. So it's a dual containment system. And what will happen is if the plastic tank ever sprang a leak, which apparently hasn't happened, there's a little pop-up indicator here that would tell you, they would say that there was a leak. But the leak would be contained. It would be a leak in between the big heavy plastic tank and the outer shell, which is also liquid tight. And you would then know you have to deal with it. You don't have to do that very often. If ever, I don't think they've had any claims, at least very few claims in the 20-some years they've been making these tanks overseas. So we've got two Roth oil tanks here. They're plastic tanks. The other thing with plastic tanks is you get condensation in oil tanks. A standard steel oil tank, we tend to have condensation. And that water that condenses through the vent pipes that go outside tends to mix with the oil and with the steel lining on a steel tank, makes it rust. And we also start to have, believe it or not, bacteria living off that. And what happens is that bacteria makes sludge. Sludge settles in the bottom of the tank, your oil burner picks it up, and you have to have more service than you might normally have to have. Plastic tank, there's nothing in there to corrode, so we don't have corrosion. And we have the tanks giving us much cleaner oil than we otherwise would get with a steel tank. So, another positive. These tanks cost more, I'll be right up front with you, than a steel oil tank. But when you do an installation like this, if all those reasons I just gave you, the dual containment, there's $1 million insurance policy on the tanks against accidental spill, cleanup policy. They'll insure up to $1 million worth of cleanup if there was ever a spill from these tanks. That's how sure they are about them. So you got that, you got the fact you're not going to get sludge, you got small footprint. If that wasn't a good enough reason, the really important reason for using Roth oil tanks in my book is the fact that we have two tanks here, and we can put these two tanks together in a matter of minutes, and we'll do it on this program. And we have an oil burner man who works with us, and he got hung up somewhere at a service call. So we don't even need him. We will have him here to go over all our work, but we're going to go ahead and show you how it all goes together anyway. And then when he'll come in, and he's going to cut and fit the black iron pipe that's going to go out for the for the vent and the fill on the system. So I guess, well, we don't. Let's get started, and I'll go over a couple of particulars, and we'll do this in real time, very quickly. So the first thing you have to do when you set a Roth oil tank, and you have to do this with any oil tank, it needs to be on a non-combustible surface. It is. It's on the concrete slab of the basement. It needs to be level. We've leveled everything up here. So that's all done. And when you have dual tanks, whether it's 2, 3, 4, however many tanks you have, it comes with a little spacer bar. This is the spacer bar, and it fits right there in between the cradles that the tanks sit on. And that tells you how far apart the tanks have to be. So it's very easy to set these things up and get them in the right position. And you'll see why that's important in a few minutes. A traditional oil tank, when you set it up, if you just plumb a vent, you plumb a fill pipe and a vent pipe outside. And the vent pipe makes a noise, and this happens to be the vent, and it whistles. When you're getting the tank filled up, all oil tanks have these vents on them. When the oil gets up to that point and there's no longer air going out, the whistle stops, and that's how the filler, the delivery person, knows to stop filling the tank. A regular oil tank, pipe in and pipe out, boom, no big deal. When we do multiple tanks, life becomes a little more complicated. And the way we deal with, there's two ways we can deal with filling multiple tanks. We could put 2 standard tanks in the basement, have 2 sets of fills and 2 sets of returns going out through the wall. That's 4 pipes going out through the wall. That's kind of cumbersome. People do it, but it's cumbersome. That's the best way, I think, to deal. One of the better ways to deal with it. The way a lot of systems are done, 2 tank systems like we have here with a standard steel tank, is they'll come into the first tank, fill it with oil. When that gets full, the pipe that would normally be the vent is just a pipe that goes over into the next tank, and then that tank fills, and then the vent is on that second tank, and that goes out. You can do that with 2 tanks. What happens, the first tank after it's filled is now under pressure of the oil coming in at 40 gallons a minute or whatever the magic number is, a lot of volume of oil coming in. So the tank kind of goes and expands, and you're pressurizing it. Now you remember I was talking about the rust and the corrosion and all the critters, the bacteria that are eating and making sludge? Well, they're weakening these tanks if they were steel tanks. And that first steel tank is under pressure. And what's going to happen? At some point it's going to start to ooze, and then it's going to start to leak, and God willing, you'll be around when it happens. Excuse me, or you'll spot it. I'm choking. It's such an exciting thing. And you'll deal with it before, you'll catch it before there's a big spill. But it happens. These things spill oil in basements. Cleanup is a bear. If you ever smelled fuel oil, it isn't pleasant. So, These guys, the Roth company, figured out a really cool way, an incredibly simple way to fill multiple tanks. This segment, we're almost halfway through the show. In this segment, we're going to hook up almost everything because it's that simple. Okay, the way these guys do it is very simple. Everything is pre-engineered to interconnect the two tanks together. There's fittings. If it's a single tank installation, it's very simple. You just have a pipe going in and a pipe going out. There's gauges and stuff. We'll look at those later. But dual tanks, they worked out a different way to hook it up. Now, what I just described, where we have one tank cascades over into a second tank, those tanks are in series. We fill the first tank, then we fill the second tank. What these guys do is they put them in parallel. Okay? So what we do when we do things in parallel is we fill them together and we vent them together. And I'll show you how we do it. Everything comes pre-cut, pre-engineered, German engineering. I'm very impressed. I was last time we did it. It has a T. This is for the fill side now. Look at that big, that's an O-ring. Mr. Man, I'm telling you, that's the kind of O-ring you want on your oil tank. I'm doing it down here so we can show you because it's a little bit easier to see than up on the tank itself. So that's one fill T. Here's the other fill T. See this big ring here? When you tighten this up, that compresses the O-ring. And can almost do this with one hand, but not quite. Oh, don't be too stupid now. Okay, so you get the idea. We tighten these up. Now, the way these devices tighten, it comes with a plastic wrench. And when this is, we'll put this on the tank in a minute. We use this wrench to tighten because it sort of is a built-in torque wrench, and you'll see why in a second. Now, this is the fill side. And what we'll do is we'll make believe right now that we're going to have the fills be right here. Okay, now you say, well, Tom, we put that on there and that's it. No, not quite. We have this. You know what this is? This is the dip tube. I love the name, the dip tube. The dip tube goes in. Now you see how far down that'll go. That's an anti-foaming device. Basically, because if we did not have them, the oil would be coming in with such velocity, it would tend to froth and get kind of messy, and it might confuse might make a lot of bubbles and stuff and not let the vent work right. So we put the two dip tubes in. Now, you ready for the big secret? These guys are so smart. And this goes back to stuff that I learned when I was in the solar business many years ago. We've got a 2-inch pipe, 2 inches, feed. We have a 2-inch vent pipe as well. This is where we're feeding oil in. Look underneath though. What happens? 2 inches restricts down to what? That's about a 1/2 inch. So we'll take these and we'll set them right in place. Those inlets go over the dip tubes, and we tighten these big rings down here that hold everything in place. There we go. And how do you know this is tight enough? You take the plastic wrench and it fits in here like so. And if it starts to bend and twist, which it'll do because it's only plastic, that's far enough. Same deal up here. For tightening this, we tighten it by hand first, just to cinch it up. And then we go like this. And this will start to deform when we've gone far enough. And it's got to go, no, it's not quite there. But anyway, that's all we have to do there. Now, with this pressurized, with oil coming in at 40 gallons per minute, it hits those little orifices, and the same amount of oil comes out of both of them at the same time. So the two tanks go like this. They fill up equally. And what happens if for some reason one tank fills up faster than the other tank? It stops here and it all comes out here. Pretty cool. And this is under no more pressure because It has the vent, and if it came up on the back side by the vent, it'll just go over because everything is in parallel. So it's a very simple, very elegant system, and you know what? It works. So it doesn't take much to put these together. I've hooked up half of the thing in about 30 seconds. We have to do the same thing in the back for the vents. The vents, that's the vent. Okay, don't you love that? And we just unscrew that. We drop the vent in. We put this back on. Oh, that's done. Wait a minute. Tom, this is going too fast. I'm getting confused now. I have another T. Oh, here's the T, right here. Here's a T, right? T goes in here, and we put that in, and we have the other T over there. Now, before we put all this together, I have to put this pipe in between, which I didn't do. So I'm doing it backwards because it's my TV show. The oil burner man's not here anyway, so we're not going to do the rest of the plumbing. But it's that simple. And one is the vent. This would be the fill. That's the vent. 2 pipes going out the building. Looks as clean as it's going to look for getting oil delivered to your house. If we had 3 tanks, we could do the same thing. We would just have, instead of a cap, so there's a cap here that would go on the, I don't have the cap piece in, but the cap will go on the end here, and that's sealed. And we would go out that way for the vent and the fill, which we're going to show you. We're not going to let you leave without seeing it all done. So it's very simple. Now, let's make believe, for right now, that's all hooked up, and it will be before we end the show. We take these off. I love the way they come off. Take that out. Take this. We're going to put a gauge in. Now, I've put gauges in oil tanks before, and usually I have my big monkey wrenches, and I'm monkeying around doing that. Here we have the gauge for the Roth tank. I got to do it right, or I'm going to get confused. This goes here. This is in here. It's got an O-ring. See the O-ring right there? Oh man, the O-ring says simple. Again, we screw that in. We do that by hand because that's, I forgot. It's been a while since I put one of these in. But we put that in, and this just drops into the tank, and then the float, let me move my hand out of the way, the float goes up and down as the oil, if the oil tank is full, floats all the way up. As the level drops, look what happens. It says to you, you need oil. It goes all the way down to 0. And you know that you have to get oil. So we'll put that in a minute. We need to get oil out of the tank. We still need to get the oil burner man here to hook up the pipe. Still a little more technology related to these tanks. The tank, everything goes through the top. Now we used to manufacture tanks for the solar business, and they were unpressurized tanks, not like these, but they were tanks nonetheless. I don't like, as a former tank manufacturer, to poke holes below the liquid level in a tank. If you can bring everything in through the top of the tank, already your tank is a much safer commodity. And when it comes to an oil tank, whether it's a Roth tank or it's a steel tank, the idea of having sludge build up in the bottom means that rather than drawing oil off the bottom of a standard oil tank where all that sludge builds up, if you can do it over the top and if there is any sludge buildup, stay at the bottom, you can be way ahead of the game. So that's exactly what they've done. This is the device that is used for getting the oil out of the tank. And it's basically a hose. It goes to the bottom of the tank, and it has a pickup in the middle. It doesn't sit in any sludge that might be down there. This would stay off the bottom, and you can see the holes right there. So the lowest it would be a couple inches off the bottom of the tank, and it would extract the oil. It goes in the same way with these very nice big connectors, and will go in the appropriate location, and they'll probably be in the front here. Now the same deal goes with these as with the feed in the vent. We have again a pre-engineered German manifold system that ties the 2 oil lines together and allows us to draw off both tanks at the same time. Everything stays leveled. We do have to prime this because this is siphoning oil out of the tank. So the oil line will come down and go across the floor to the boiler. Once it's primed, it's a done deal. Now this is a check valve and also a thermal fuse. So if there was a fire, this would break and that would shut off the oil feed. That's by law. You have that on any kind of oil tank, any kind of oil device. So putting that up there for now. And all we need to do at this point is get all the hookup done officially, and we'll just come back and take a quick look at it all put together. So there really isn't much more to do than have our licensed oil burner man here, who has been to Roth school, as have I. Well, through the magic of television, Bob the oil burner man has been here, and he's actually here today actually finishing the absolute final thing. We've got all the lines hooked up now, and you can see in the back, as I mentioned before, we have the fill pipe, which is here, and we have the vent pipe, which is there, and they go right out into 2-inch black iron pipe for the oil delivery man to do, man or woman, to do his thing, his or her thing. We got the tanks filled, so we are almost ready to do stuff here. The only thing we have to do now is we have the feed line here. This is the 2 pipes together in parallel, and he just stuck that in there. He went to get a couple of fittings, and from here now we'll run the oil line down the outside, and the boiler is over on the other side of the basement, so we have a dilemma in that we have to come down here. We're going to come down to the floor, and it has to go. I'm just going to sneak right over here. Don't go away. Oil line has to go inside conduit, and we have this flexible plastic conduit which will go and contain the oil line. So for 2 reasons. To protect it from crushing, you can step on this stuff and it does not break. But also, if there was ever a leak in the line, it will contain it. And more importantly, most basements have wet floors or concrete floors or some kind of floor that isn't necessarily the most friendly to copper oil lines. So being contained in there, if we had the copper line sitting down here right on the concrete, you've seen it from old installations, probably many of you, it will corrode over time and start to ooze oil onto the floor. We don't want that to happen. We have one little dilemma here, one of many that we've had over the months here. We've got this door here that goes out to the bulkhead, and we would like to run the line right against the wall to the boiler, which is on the opposite corner of the house. So I have started to poke a hole. We've got to either jackhammer or use a chisel to make a trench to put this in, and we can do that. You can't bury an oil line, a bare copper oil line, but if you put it inside the conduit, you can. So I don't know if the timing is going to work that Bob will be back with his parts by the time I get done poking the hole in the floor. Probably not, because I'm taping a TV show right now. But I also have a saw with a cement bit, so blade, so I may try to cut once I get 2 holes done on either end. But that's not held us up. We've got this done, we've got it filled, and it's always good practice to, when you do the first fill up, I always like to be here. Not that I have any doubt about the tanks. These are the best tanks there are on the market. They got dual containment, everything is right, but we just want to make sure that everything goes according to plan. So I was here when the man was outside filling, just so I could say, hey, it looks like there's an issue here. Of course, there were no issues. Roth oil tanks, they are the tank of choice, especially for multiple tank installations where you have to store a lot of oil on site. And they have different size tanks. They have 165, 275 gallon, and 400 gallon tanks, big tanks. But you get what you pay for, remember that. Oh, that's like a wise thing I just said. Take care, we'll see you next week. Production support for Hot and Cold is brought to you by American Solar Technics, manufacturers of components for wood burning and solar heating systems.